So now that we're back, first I'd like to talk about, as we were stating before we just cut, the main differences happen to be, of course, with basic Buddhism, the three treasures being the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Nichiren Shu, of course, we have a different view upon that, but a kind of what we're building view on it. And then, of course, Nichiren Shoshu and Soka Gakkai. Now we can't say they're one and the same, so we're going to have to, if we could talk about each of those. So first, let's talk about Nichiren Shu Buddhism and the three treasures.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Nichiren Shu and Nichiren Shoshu's view of the three treasures. To begin with, becoming a Buddhist means taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
Right.
And in traditional Buddhism, all over East Asia, including Tibet, including Theravada, the way you become a Buddhist, even as a layperson, never mind a monk or nun or clergy, is taking refuge in the three treasures.
Of course.
So it's very important how you understand what the three treasures are, and that's where different traditions are different.
Absolutely.
Right. That's what really will distinguish Theravada from Mahayana and Nichiren Buddhism from other forms of Mahayana.
Right.
So the first refuge is the Buddha, the awakened one. And in Theravada Buddhism, they see the Buddha as someone who passed away into nirvana, extinction, 2,500 years ago. Mahayana understands the Buddha as being kind of a cosmological figure, right? So the Pure Land Buddhists take refuge in the Buddha who is Amitabha, the Buddha of infinite light or infinite life. He's kind of a cosmic Buddha. More tantric traditions will talk about Mahavairochana, who personifies the Dharmakaya, who's kind of the reality body, a personification of reality, right? But Nichiren in Kanjin Hanzon Sho defines the Buddha as the eternal Buddha of chapter 16. And if you read Kanjin Hanzon Sho Kaimoku Sho, you see that his understanding of that is based on Tiantai's teaching that the eternal Buddha of chapter 16 embodies not just the historical Buddha, not just sort of a cosmological heavenly Buddha, not just a personification of the reality body, but is all three at once. And that all three aspects are unborn and deathless. So this is a very whole or complete way of understanding Buddha. And Nichiren believed that the ways the other schools were teaching about Buddha were too limited. They focused too much on one aspect. The Buddha as heavenly being in another world that we can be reborn into after we die, or as personifying an impersonal principle, the Dharmakaya, or as a historical figure who died long ago, as the non-Mahayana schools depicted him. So Nichiren was really aiming towards taking refuge in a full and complete view of Buddha as the unborn and deathless teacher who is always with us and who is our own true self.
Right. So now since I wanted to discuss, as we were saying, about the three treasures and the difference. Now we're talking about the differences within Nichiren and Shoshu.
Right. So the Shoshu view of the treasure of the Buddha is they've defined Nichiren Shonin, or they always say Dai Shonin, as the true Buddha.
As the Buddha, yes.
Right. And I can't pretend that I fully understand exactly how the Shoshu is defining that. Do they just mean the true Buddha of the latter age, or apparently there's some subtleties, and I'm not really clear that Josei Toda, the second president of the Soka Gakkai, himself understood what they were saying. But the bottom line is that in their publications and the way they taught when I was a member, and what many people coming out of the Shoshu or Soka Gakkai coming into Nichiren Shu have to understand is that we don't consider the treasure of the Buddha to be Nichiren. Nichiren did not consider himself to be that.
Absolutely.
There is nothing in any of his authenticated writings, or even in the disputed ones.
Well, it's interesting
where he
because,
claims
you
to
know,
be.
right, because we, as you were stating, you know, Nichiren in some of his writings construed himself one or two as Jogyo,
Yeah.
but even as a Jofukyo,
Yeah.
too, in some of the
Yeah.
writings.
And in most of those, he's just saying, you know, I am not Bodhisattva superior practice,
Right.
but I'm the one who's doing this, this, and this.
I embody the aspects.
Right. By implication,
Character.
saying, but maybe I am.
Right.
I'm not. What he's saying is, I'm not claiming to be, but I'm doing this work,
Right,
so maybe I am.
right.
Yeah. There's like one writing. I think it's the it's either the Shimoyama letter or letter. I forget. There's another letter that he wrote, kind of as a ghostwriting for one of his disciples to present to their Lord, where Nichiren, writing about himself in the third person, says Nichiren is Bodhisattva superior practice. You know, but that's like one or two instances.
Well, you know, it's the same aspect of the different manifestations of Kuan Yin, whereas people say in most Buddhism,
Yeah.
it is not a literal manifestation, but the aspect of.
Right.
So is that if somebody acts in the capacity of Kuan Yin,
Right.
then therefore they're embodying
That archetype.
the archetype
Right.
of Kuan Yin.
Right. So there's nothing really extraordinary about that, actually.
Right.
And so, you know, Nichiren Shu, we consider Nichiren Shonin, and then sometimes we will say Dai Shonin, to be the appearance or, we usually in English we say the appearance of Bodhisattva superior practice.
And also, of course, we represent with the Sangha,
Right.
you know, as the representation of the Sangha.
Yeah, well, to briefly go through the other two, you know, in Nichiren Shu, the treasure of the Dharma is the Lotus Sutra,
Right.
is Myoho Renge Kyo, you know, and we praise that by chanting Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. And then the Sangha in Nichiren Shu is understood to be, as per Nichiren's writings, the Bodhisattvas of the earth
Right.
and their retinues.
As inscribed on the mandala.
Right, exactly. So, whereas in Nichiren Shoshu, you know, for them, I guess they say that the treasure of the Dharma is the Daimoku, you know, which, fair enough.
Right.
But for them, they say the treasure of the Sangha is the, I guess, subsists in the high priest of Taiseki-ji.
Of course.
You know, and that's not how we understand it.
One of the one of the things I admired about Nichiren, you know, because one of the big aspects of Shoshu, Nichiren Shoshu, is of course the succession of high priests,
No.
giving them, as they see it, the authority as the actual successor of Nichiren Shonin through Nikko Shonin.
Yeah.
One of the things that I admired and liked about Nichiren Shonin, as I was explaining through Nichiren Shu, is that he had a variety of disciples, you know, his main disciples that he gave the job of spreading the Dharma through, that in Nichiren was not setting himself up as a leader of an organization, leader of a, you know, another religion.
Kind of Buddhist pope.
Right.
And neither was he appointing any of his disciples as
Right, and I felt as if that was a honorable thing to do, because I think one of the things that I particularly don't like about religious people is that a lot of times it's not about the transmission of truth or happiness or dharma,
but
but
the perpetuation of their institution.
Of their institution, and then ultimately themselves,
right,
as upholding that institution. And you know, I believe that Nichiren's character was not that, because he always challenged those people who specifically handled things through secret teachings, also through transmission, personal transmission, and also succession.
Right. Well, he kept quoting, you know, one of the 4 guidelines from the Nirvana Sutra to follow the Dharma, not the person.
Not the person.
He was not setting up a personality cult by any means. He was saying, you all need to come directly back to the Dharma. In fact, in Shugo Kokodan, which was kind of his preparatory writing for Rishoan Kokoran, it's where he put in all his research so that he had all his arguments in line when he wrote Rishoan Kokoran, which is more of a manifesto call to action for the government. Well, in Shugo Kokodan, he asked the question, well, who should be our teacher in the latter age? And he says, you know, there is no one really qualified to teach in the latter age. so we must make the Lotus Sutra itself our teacher.
Right.
You know,
in which Nichiren Shonin humbly shows throughout the writings, even though he's personified as this arrogant,
right.
outspoken person, he always says that I'm an ignorant, stupid, low-ranking monk
Yeah.
whose only saving grace is that he has faith in
Yeah.
the Lotus Sutra.
Yeah. Well, you know, I believe Nichiren had three ways of viewing himself and his followers. Not just himself, but all those who were also chanting Daimoku.
Right.
And, you know, I get this from Shoujo Jiso, which is a disputed writing, but
Right.
one that we often quote in Nichiren Shu, so it's held in pretty high repute
Absolutely.
among us. Now, the first is that level that you're talking about, that view that we're common, humble, ordinary people at our age. You know, we have no good roots. We are starting from scratch, you know. So the only thing we can do now is to sow the seed of Daimoku.
Right.
Start at the very beginning and sow that seed. And we're all in the same boat. None of us is better or worse than any other. We're all together sowing this seed. And that's one level of understanding. And you go deeper than that, and Nichiren says in Shoujo Jiso Sho that anyone who is chanting Daimoku must be a bodhisattva of the earth, or at least one of their followers.
Mm.
So that's a pretty exalted position.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, if you look at chapter 15, the bodhisattvas of the earth, when they appear, are much more grand than even the bodhisattvas that appeared before, like Manjushri
Right.
and Maitreya and the others.
They all sit, you know, they all stand in awe and
Exactly.
unknowing. And,
Right. I mean, they're practically Buddhas already.
Well, and it also shows that the particular idea that we didn't come to this faith out of, you know, nothingness, that it actually came through some previous connection.
There's a
as
deep,
is,
beginningless connection
absolutely.
with the Lotus Sutra.
Right.
And that leads into the third thing, which is where Nichiren says in Shoujo Jiso Sho and other places, is there any other true Buddha other than us ordinary people? You know, Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha, was a person like us. He wasn't a celestial figure. And he's the one who attained awakening. You know, so it's a delusion to look for Buddhahood in some other ideal realm. It's our true nature.
Right.
And that's, you know, that's just general East Asian Mahayana teaching.
Right.
There's nothing, you know, radical about Nichiren or any other East Asian Buddhist teacher saying that. Where Nichiren differs is in connecting the realization of that
Right.
to faith in the Lotus Sutra and Odaimoku. So that's the deepest level. So I think what happens there is the provisional bodhisattvas and bodhisattva practice is ordinary people aiming at Buddhahood as some future state
Right.
or some other state. Whereas the bodhisattvas of the earth,
Or through a medium of some
through
sort.
medium,
Yeah.
right? Whereas the bodhisattvas of the earth, and therefore those of us who chant Daimoku, are people who have, if not direct realization, at least faith that we fundamentally already are Buddhas,
Right.
who are trying more and more to manifest that, to express that fully.
Well, in many ways, that's even considered the truth. Once you realize that,
Yeah,
that and the truth is inseparable.
right.
You know, so, all right, but going back, so for instance, let's say,
But first let me say one thing.
yeah,
You know, sometimes when we tell people who come from Soka Gakkai or
Right.
maybe Nichiren Shoshu, we say we do not consider Nichiren a Buddha. You know, he's not the treasurer.
right.
And they say, well, if he didn't become a Buddha and we're following his practice, then
Right.
what good is it?
What good is it
And
to
that's a
us?
good question. You know, and that's why I think you need to know these three levels.
Right,
And the other thing you need to know is that the word Buddha gets used in different ways in East Asia.
right,
So there's a very strict way, a technical way of saying the word Buddha. Buddha is one who attained awakening on his own and set the wheel of the Dharma in motion.
the two major accomplishments.
Right. And Shakyamuni Buddha is the one that did that for this age.
Right,
You can't have another Buddha like that until all traces of Buddhism have totally disappeared. So that's why in traditional Buddhist treatises and sutras it says there can only be one Buddha per world, per dispensation of the Dharma.
right.
You don't
Until
have
it's
2 or 3
followed,
Buddhas teaching 2 or 3 different types of Dharma. There's
Right.
just the one, it's just a term that means the first guy who set things in motion. And the next one will be after everything disappears and you have to start again. But then there's a much looser meaning of the word Buddha, which is used to refer, it's kind of like an honorable title for anyone who attains some great degree of awakening.
Right, and even in non-Buddhist texts,
Yeah.
people are considered Buddhas.
Right.
You know.
Right, and in East Asian Buddhism, the Zen Buddhists do this a lot. They refer to their old previous patriarchs or ancestors as Buddhas.
Right.
Tiantai Juri is referred to as
a Buddha.
the Buddha. So, in that loose sense, yeah, we can say that Nichiren attained Buddhahood or realized his Buddhahood.
Right.
But not in the sense of replacing the first of the three treasures, because that's reserved for Shakyamuni. And especially in Nichiren's writing, when he's talking about who the treasure of the Buddha is, he's talking about the Buddha of chapter 16, who, as I said, you have to have a full understanding of what Buddha
Absolutely.
is. That takes in the historical Shakyamuni Buddha and kind of the cosmological Buddha and the unborn and deathless nature of the Buddha, all that stuff that's going on in chapter 16.
Right.
So it's a huge misreading of Nichiren Buddhism to try to turn it into a personality cult around Nichiren.
But a lot of times that is one of the aspects of religion that is the same anywhere you go.
Yeah.
It usually revolves around a personality.